Welcome. Today what we're going to do is we're going to walk through how to allow Excel to work for you. It may seem intimidating at first glance, but hopefully by the end of this tutorial, you'll be a lot more comfortable using Excel and you'll recognize that it is an extremely useful tool. What we're going to do is we're going to end up making our spreadsheet look like this. Okay? It's not going to look like this automatically. It takes some formatting. And then from this data, we will generate a scatter plot graph that should look similar to this, and a bar graph looking similar to this. The reason why we have a bar graph and a scatter plot graph separately, because this kind of summarizes our data, is paying attention to the average heart rate based on the effects of caffeine, whereas the scatter plot is looking at every single test subject that we have in our experiment. And so that's why we have two separate graphs telling us different information. So let's get to work. First thing that we need to do, Excel does not automatically know how to format your tables for you. So we need to format it for ourselves. First thing I need to do is remove all the formatting that I've already done. Okay, so this is what your table will look like when you first enter it. What I did is I typed in subject, my control group, and the units for my measurement, beats per minute, experimental group, and beats per minute. You notice here there's decimals present. There should not be decimal present in your numbers. There are in mine because I used a random number generator which provides decimals for me. That's how I invented those decimals. Over here we can increase or decrease the decimal, okay, with this button on Excel. So I'm just going to decrease my decimal places by clicking this button several times. Now we no longer have decimals. So that's one way to adjust the number of decimals. Excel works for you. The next thing we need to do is calculate an average. Now you may have your calculator handy, you may know how to use it extremely well and all that, but if we can get Excel to calculate the average, then why not? And we can. All we have to do is tell it to equal. We want this cell that we're in right now to equal the average of, in parentheses, and then we're going to have a range. We're going to have a range from subject 1's control group all the way down to subject 15. Now, all I did was I clicked in this and held down the mouse and scrolled all the way down to the bottom. You see it entered C3 to C17. C3 down to C17. So that's the range. And then I'll close my parentheses and hit enter. The average heart rate for the control group is 67. Additionally, we can do the same thing here. Equals the average of D3 to D17 and close my parentheses, hit enter. The average heart rate for my experimental group was 78 beats per minute. Over here I've repeated that information. I'd already done this, so I repeated that information. It's just going to assist when we're graphing using a bar graph. If we can keep those numbers together with their titles, it'll make our bar graph a lot easier to construct. So that's why that's over there. Next, we need to make this data, if we're going to print it and publish it or show it off somehow, we need to make it a little bit more viewer friendly. Right now it's very small. It's 11-point font is the default here. So let's increase the font size a little bit. We can get away with, I think, 16. And we need to resize. You see that subject got cut off? What I can do is I can highlight the cell and bring my mouse to the top of a row, or sorry, top of a column, and in between those two columns, make the cursor look like this, and double click. And what that does is it readjusts those columns to be exactly how wide they need to be. Next thing I can do is I can center them. Center the data. Data is centered now. It's a lot more viewer friendly. Next thing we could do is we could add some borders here. This is the border thing. We can put borders everywhere. We could even do a thick box border around the outside. So now you got a little heavier border around the outside and then thinner borders on the inside. It still looks a little cluttered to me. I'd like to really set off the numbers. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the subject and I'm going to make them gray. And the subject numbers along with its averages, make those gray. And I will make these bold as well as these bold, because those are really the real highlights of my graph. Okay. Now we've just gone from something that was very plain, not very viewer friendly, to something that is much more viewer friendly. So that's step one. Okay, formatted our table, made our table look very nice. All right. Now we're going to start creating our graphs. The first graph we're going to create is a scatter plot graph. All right. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to highlight the data that I want. All right. I'm not including the average here. All right. I just click and highlight. Hold down the mouse, release the mouse. Now I'm going to insert a scatter graph, right, with only the markers. We don't play connect the dots, so we don't need either one of those. Okay. And this is what is generated. Again, Excel will produce a product for you that we're going to need to edit. You notice it says control in beats per minute, and experimental 1 in beats per minute. That's kind of redundant, so I'm going to end up getting rid of the BPM eventually, but we'll get there when we get there. First thing, right click, move chart. We're going to move chart to a new sheet, and we're going to call this scatter plot 2. Okay, now we have it isolated. We can work on it here all by itself. First and foremost, we're going to need some titles. So under chart layout, the first thing that I click on is this little cell here, different layouts. There's several different layouts. We need titles. So I'm clicking the button and you have chart title, axis title, and axis title. Okay, they're slowly but surely going to make this look better and better. The first thing we need to know is, hey, what went on here? Okay, we collected data, this sample data that I'm working with. I'm just going to say it was because of the effects of caffeine. Okay, effects of caffeine on heart rate. Okay. Thing is, I don't really need to include this part. I don't need to include on heart rate. And I'm going to show you why right now. I'm going to delete it and show you why. Effects of caffeine. Because right here, this y-axis, this is the heart rate of my individual. So as soon as I say this is the heart rate in beats per minute, okay, BPM, and close my parentheses. I'm going to make that larger so people can actually see it. Right, we create a graph so that we can display it. So this is heart rate and beats per minute. Well, if I wrote heart rate and beats per minute up here, it would be redundant. Again, that's my redundancy issue. Here, when I have control, I'll try to get rid of that here shortly. Might take a little tweaking. Actually, I know how I can do it. I'll take care of that right now. I'm going to jump to my sheet. So down here, sheet 1. And I'm going to change this to just control. Because what the graph is doing, I'm going to change this to just experimental 1. On yours, you might have experimental 2. I removed beats per minute here because Excel is so smart that it's taking that information and plugging it right into my key, my legend here. All right, so I removed beats per minute and now it's not there, so it's no longer redundant. Next up, the maximum, we want the highlight of our graph to be our data. All right. So I'm going to delete these grid lines because those are unnecessary. Right? If I want to, I can look at the table to figure out the actual numbers specifically. Additionally, this top data point is 99. You can see the data point when I hover over top of it, 11,99. That's subject 11, and the heart rate in beats per minute was 99. So the scale doesn't need to be all the way up to 120. I'm going to right-click, format the axis, and here we have our minimum, 0, that's good. Maximum, we're going to go to fixed. Instead of making it automatically 120, we're going to make it 100 because we know our data will fit in there. Our tick marks, I'm going to put them crossing the axis, and you can see that right here. The tick mark crosses the axis. There's no tick mark. I like having the tick marks present so you can see them a little bit better. The next thing, I'm going to adjust my major unit to be 25. And what that's going to do is it's going to make this, instead of 20, 40, 60, 80, 100, it's going to be 25, 50, 75, 100. A little bit less information that doesn't really matter will be present. Okay. I'm going to make my numbers slightly larger to, let's say, 16. I'll do the same thing here. Format my axis. Right-click, format my axis. We actually only have 15 subjects, so I'm not going to extend it to 16. And I actually want this to show up for every subject. So I'm going to add information there. And again, I'm going to make my tick marks cross the axis. Okay. I need to give my axis a title. So these are my test subjects. And I need to increase the font size. I would mimic the font size here. So this font size was 18. So this font size ought to be 18 as well. Furthermore, this font size was 16. So I'm going to make my axis font size 16. And I'll make my legend size 16 as well. Last but not least, our main axis title. I'll increase that font size significantly to, let's say, 28. So it's set apart from everything else significantly. There we have our graph. I still want to highlight the actual chart area. So I'm going to click outside the chart area, right click to format it. And I'm going to put a border on it. You'll see why later on. A solid black line. And I'll fill it with a color not like my data points. I'll fill it with just a plain gray, a light gray. Okay. And now you can see that our actual data now is the highlight of our graph, which is a good thing. Right, that's what we want. It appears to me like this red dot, the experimental groups, are bigger than the control groups. So I'm just going to click and then right click, format data series. And I'm going to change my markers, my marker options. click built-in so I can affect the size. I just jump it up a little bit so it looks about the same size as the red experimental 1 markers. I think it needs to be about 10. See what that, now they look about equivalent in size, so that's better. Our graph is starting to look very good. There's one little bit of information more that I want to add in there, and that is to add a trend line. It's going to be a linear trend line, and I want to display the equation on the chart. All right, trend lines are going to show the general trends of the graph, okay? And this is for experimental 1. I don't need it to say experimental 1, so I just backspace that. And I'm going to drop that right below it so that make this a little bigger so I have some room. Increase the size. I think the smallest font size I have is 16 right now, so that's fine. I'll go ahead and move it right there. Now my control, my blue dots, just find any random blue dot, click on it, then right click, add a trend line. Linear again, display equation on chart. Okay, again, we end up with a little bit of extra information. We're just going to get rid of it. And move this guy. Make it larger. 16 again was that size that we were using. And move it. There. Move it up just a hair. There we have it. Now we have our equations for our trend lines. We have our control group, our experimental group. And what's all this going to tell you? Why do we include these trend lines? One of the reasons why I include these trend lines is because they tell you a little bit more about the data. All right. So, y equals mx plus b. All right. So my control group, you look at the y-intercept for that control group, 68.39 versus the y-intercept. That'd be the heart rate for my experimental group, 85. That's going to tell you that, hey, the experimental group, it's going to be higher than your control group. So whatever the effect of caffeine was, probably was increasing that heart rate. All right. Additionally, sometimes the slope of the line is significant. Here, the slope isn't as significant because our test subjects, it's just a random variable. We could have reordered our test subjects any way we wanted, and that would affect the slope of the line. So we don't really want to pay attention to the slope in this case, but we do want to pay attention to the plus b, the y-intercept. Right? So this is our scatter plot graph. All right? This is under data. Shifting gears, the next thing that we're going to look at is here, our summary data. So we're looking at average. When I perform my scatter plot, I did not include my average. Now I'm going to be looking at the big picture, the average. You see 67 versus 78. They're relatively close to our y-intercepts from that scatter plot graph. But let's look at it. All right, we're going to try to graph this. I'm going to insert, this time, a column graph. This is your typical bar graph. All right. Inserting a column graph, and here it is. Again, it's pretty plain, pretty simple. We need to make it better. First thing we're going to do is move it. This is going to be called bar graph 2. Sorry, 2. And now we can just focus on one thing at a time. First things first, the legend in this case, totally useless because our axis tells us exactly what's going on here. You can see right away we're going to have a redundancy problem again because this is heart rate on the y-axis and we have BPM, beats per minute, again on the x-axis, which is unnecessary. So let me go back to my sheet and delete out beats per minute. and delete out beats per minute. And it should have fixed it all by itself. It most certainly did. Excellent. The next thing, these are both blue, whereas only one was blue, one was red on the scatter plot graph. So I'm going to click on the scatter plot graph. Control was blue, experimental was red. So on my bar graph, control was blue, experimental needs to be red. So I'm going to click, make sure that you're only clicking on the experimental. All right, that's the only one that should be highlighted. And right click. I'm going to format this data point. My fill will be solid, and it needs to be the red color. All right, not that blue color. All right, so now you can see that the color is consistent throughout my graphs and my presentation. That's important. I'm also going to decrease the separation in them. See if that does anything. I don't know if it did or not. Let's move this out of the way. Ah, there we go. Okay. The gap width. I want the gap to be smaller. Move that back to 0. I need to read. Okay. So now again, we want the data points to be the highlight of our graph. We don't need these. We have a chart that we can look at to get that information. The design tab. We do need some titles. All right. We need a main axis and a right-hand axis title. So I'm just going to select any one of these and have both of them on there. Select this guy. It adds some extra stuff. I'll just get rid of that extra stuff. Backspace. Click and backspace. Okay. It gave me my main axis and my y-axis title. Recall from last time. This is heart rate. And your units are always in parentheses, beats per minute. Recall from last time, our axis title was 18-point font. Our main title was up to 28-point font. And this is the effects of caffeine. That's sufficient. I could put average here or average heart rate here. It doesn't really matter. Another term for average is mean. We could write mean or average, whichever we prefer. All right, I'll keep it average for now though. So when you look at this graph, our numbers are small, so I'm going to increase the size of our numbers up to 16 like we had before. I'm going to increase the size of my x-axis titles to 16 as we had before as well. And I'm going to make those bold because that one is bold as well. Actually, I'm going to increase this to 18 because that's the only information on our x-axis, and that would mimic this title. All right, bold and 18-point font, bold and 18-point font. Now this graph is actually skewed a little bit. If you look at this and you don't really think about anything, it looks like the experimental group doubled the heart rate as control. All right, and it didn't. It did not. It's not a doubling in heart rate. You see the scale of this graph? Excel automatically put in 60 as the minimum and 80 as the maximum. When we look back at our sheet, the numbers we provided were 67 and 78. So 80 as a maximum is a good maximum, but when we input our minimum as 60, that 60 skews the view of the graph. So I'm just going to right click, I'm going to format that axis, and I will make my minimum, fix that minimum to be 0, okay, not 60. and I'll change my major unit to go every 20. So it'll be 20, 40, 60, 80. And I'll make my mark cross, major tick mark across the axis. Okay. Oops. See, it auto-formatted it for me again. So I'm going to have to reformat my axis. What it did is it jumped up to 80. I didn't catch that when it did it, so fix that to 80. And now again, the highlight of our graph is our data, our numbers. Looking pretty good. Let's get it looking just like this one. To get it looking just like this one, I just got to add that gray background on it. So somewhere on the outside, right click, format chart area. The fill will be solid, and it's the light gray. Okay. Let me close that. There we have it. We have our graphs formatted. They look pretty good. We got, of course, our data here as well. All right. Eventually, I'm going to need to include my beats per minute here as well, but I need to move my graphs first. You're going to do a lab report. You need to move this stuff into a Word document. And when you do that, you're going to cause all sort of formatting issues, unless you do it the way I suggest. What I'm going to do is I'm going to right-click, copy, go to my Word document, right-click. If you click paste here, like this, okay, what you've got when you start resizing things, everything gets screwed up, and it's a formatting nightmare. So let's delete that. Instead of pasting it normally, we're going to paste special. And we're not going to paste it as in a Microsoft Office graphic object. We're just going to paste it as a JPEG. So it's going to paste as a picture. Of course, it's gigantic, but all I need to do is resize it, and it'll keep the formatting the same. So it'll look the same. We can adjust the size however we need to adjust the size, but the formatting will not change. All right. So that is very, very useful. Additionally, if I wanted a specific size, I could click on Format the Picture. I could change the size to, have a height of 4 inches instead of 3.91, and it'll auto adjust to whatever height I need it to be. Okay. Additionally, when I go to paste my bar graph, I'll do it the exact same way. Right click, copy, go to my Word document, and paste special. I'm going to paste it as a JPEG. Okay. And here it is, gigantic again. Now see here, this one, how big did we make it? 4 inches high. If I want all my graphs to be the same size, now all I have to do is click this guy. Instead of 6.91, I'm going to change this to 4 and hit enter. And it'll automatically resize it. Now my graphs are identically sized. That's a nice advantage to adjusting this. So then they're taking up the same height, or you could adjust it so that they're the same width, whichever you choose. The last thing that you might need in your Word document for your lab report is your data table. Your data table would come first before your graphs because you created your data table first. It's kind of like order of operation in math. Remember here, we need this to say beats per minute. We need to include units in our data table. So in parentheses, beats per minute, close parentheses. You'll see that it did in fact screw up those numbers. See, now it says beats per minute, beats per minute, beats per minute. Additionally, on our bar graph, beats per minute. All right. But we've already pasted the picture. So you don't see control group beats per minute or experimental group beats per minute. Okay, which is a good thing. We don't want it to have that information on there. And here, It doesn't say beats per minute or beats per minute, so it's not redundant here because we already pasted them as pictures. Just got to copy that table and paste that table. So go to sheet 1. Now I'm going to select this table, right click, copy, move to Excel, and here, if we just paste it normally, it's not the worst thing in the world. It is going to resize and everything when I change this to something reasonable, to something like 12-point font. Here I'm just resizing all of my cells. This is very inefficient. Let's go to table properties, row, specify height. Yes, I want to specify the height. There we go. Adjusted the row height there. And now I'll double click, resize that guy, and resize that guy. So now this is manageable. We can work with that. Okay. So now we've pasted all of our items in. We would just need to finish up our lab report, all the write-up part.